Right, welcome to this Q&A. Again, I want to welcome on to this Q&A. Question came in earlier. Question, well, actually, somewhat similar question, not exactly, but we'll hit both of them, I guess. First question was, or really, second question, really. Then we'll get to the other question. First question was charity, giving charity. How much does the person have to give? What's the obligation of what we call giving meister? Meister literally means a tenth. So it means you give a 10%, you give a tenth, right? 10% of what you make, right? So that's meister. All right. You give 10%. You give 10%. Now you give up to 20%. Shouldn't really give more than 20% because you give more than 20%. Then, God forbid, a person may need the help of others. You don't want to give everything away. You can test God. That's one of the things. One of the things you can test God about giving. What about parnosa? About livelihoods. Etc. Nonetheless, we say give up to about 20% is maximum amount. How much do people give? They should give 10%, right? I would assume a lot of people give 10%. If they're able to, what if you can't give 10%? What if you can't give 5%? What if you're in the red? What if you're seriously in the red? Then the halacha is you don't have to give, right? You don't lose by giving, but again, if you don't have what to give, you don't give, right? You don't have an obligation. I would say keep track of, what you have to give, and then eventually, if you can, you give. But if you're seriously in the red, right, or seriously in debt, then put yourself more in debt because you want to give charity, you're exempt, right? 100% you're exempt. So the obligation, again, giving charity just in general, is 10%, right? You want to give up to 20%, you can certainly do that, but the obligation is 10%. So then a question came about poor. There's an obligation to give matanos levione, all right, gifts to the poor, right? So who do you give to? So usually there are people in the community that collect for poor families, right? Let's say, and they know that they're in need. So basically, unless you know someone personally who's in need, you could give to them. But the question is, if you give to them, right, then it might be embarrassing. So there are, what you could do is give to a third party, right, who gives to that family, right? That you could do, right? Usually, there are people in the community that in general, take responsibility for this, right? In other words, they have families they collect for. So therefore, you give to them. You're relying obviously on them that these families are deserving, right? So you don't necessarily need to know who they are, right? It's even better if you don't know who they are in general. But I would say that there are people that, that do this, that collect for poor families. So you give to them. So you give to them, and they will give out on that day. On Purim, they will give out. They will give money to these families. Now the question is, there's the question comes up: what if you don't give cash? Yeah, let's say cash is always good, right? Show me the green, as I've heard people say. Cash is always king. Nonetheless, what if you give a post-dated check? Can you give a post-dated check? So really, you shouldn't give a post-dated check. The reason you shouldn't give a post-dated check is because you want the person to use the money now, right? If someone, let's say, could get someone to give them money for that check, that'd be a different story, right? But let's say, if you're going to give to a family, let's say a poor family, they can't use a post-dated check. Post-dated check doesn't help them, right? They need cash. So if you give someone's going to give to the family and they're able to get cash from someone else for the amount of the check, very good. Yeah, but it's certainly better. Certainly better to give cash. Same thing by Luv and Esrog. Right? By Luv and Esrog on Sukkot, right? You should not pay with a post-dated check. The reason is that's a little bit different reason. The reason is because a lulav and an esrog has to be yours, has to belong to you on has to belong to you on for the holiday, for the beginning of the holiday, right? 100% it has to be yours. So therefore, if you give a post-dated check, technically you tell me it's yours, right? The one who's selling it is willing to take it. Okay. Even if the one selling it is willing to take it, doesn't have cash in his hands, right? Unless he could, someone would give him the cash for the check. That doesn't matter. That's not necessarily his fault, his problem, right? The problem is the person who has a lulav and an esrog. The interesting thing is it has to belong to them, right? So therefore, it's an explicit verse that says it has to belong to you. So therefore, since it has to belong to you, you can't buy it with a post-dated check, right? Even, if you had money and someone was willing to change the check, all right, that's one thing. But again, it has to belong to you, right? So therefore, even if the one selling it agrees and he says, I'll take it for X amount, whatever, you have 2 weeks to pay it or 3 weeks to pay it or whatever. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's better not to. Right? It's definitely better not to. If you have no choice, you can do it. Right? You can do it. But again, that's a different issue. Because the issue is it really has to belong to you. So you tell me it belongs to me. I gave him the check. Right? I gave him the check. He gave me the lulav and esrog and whatever I bought. Right? I picked it up. It's mine. Right? Now, what happens? And, it can't happen. What happened? Let's say a person got, had something come in that they didn't realize, and then the check bounces. So really, whatever you say before the fact, before it really wasn't yours in the first place. Why? Because you didn't pay for it. You say, I did pay for it. All right, I gave a check. Very good. Very good. You gave a check. Okay. Yeah, but if the check doesn't clear, then you really have it without paying. If you have it without paying, it's not really yours. You gotta tell me you picked it up. Right? You picked it up. Doesn't mean you have to lift it high off the ground, whatever. You picked it up, it's yours. You made an acquisition according to everybody. Okay, so this becomes a little bit dodgy, as English would say. Yeah, becomes a little bit dodgy because we're gonna say after the fact it really wasn't yours. Why? Because you didn't pay for it. Right? It's like it's a vicious catch 22 over here. Right? On the one hand, you're gonna say I paid for it. I acquired it. I made an acquisition. The seller agreed. Let me make the acquisition. Very good. Problem is there was no coverage on the check. But you didn't know that. Right? You didn't know that. So for all technical purposes, it's yours. Right? It belongs to you. Okay. But now we got a technical issue here. Technical issue is you didn't really pay for it. Right? You didn't end up paying for it. Right? So now, even if you covered straight away, right? So in the period before that, was that yours or not? So that's the question. But you'll tell me you still fulfill obligation that way. Okay, right? But that's a different issue. Why is it a different issue? Because a lulav and an esrog has to belong to you. Right? It has to belong to you. So before on the first day, you fulfill your mitzvah of shaking the lulav. Right? Let's say someone else takes it. Someone else uses it. Right? So you have to tell them to give it to you on condition. You're giving it to them on condition they're returning it to you. Because on the first day, the first 2 days outside of Israel, it has to belong to you. Right? If it belongs to someone else after that, it doesn't matter. Right? But the first day, since it's Torah obligation on the first day, it has to belong to you. Now, there is an issue. There is one issue with that, and that is what happens if the first day of Sukkot is on Shabbos? If the first day of Sukkot is on Shabbos, guess what? You don't shake the lulav on Shabbos, right? Just like you don't read the Megillah, you don't read the Book of Esther on Shabbos. You do not. You don't shake the lulav on Shabbos, right? You don't shake the lulav on Shabbos. So therefore, the first day can't shake it. Okay, so we're much more lenient on the quality. It has to be when I was getting like the best because the other days, the other 6 days of shaking the lulav, it's rabbinical. I mean, you have to beautify the mitzvah. That's true, right? But a person won't necessarily go all out because the Torah obligation you don't have because you're not shaking it on the first day, right? But again, that's a whole different issue because it has to belong to you, right? It has to belong to you. Now, in this case, person's giving money to the poor on Purim, right? If a person giving money to a poor family, let's say, on what do you call it, on Purim. So again, you are relying on the person that's going to give to them. Very good, right? So therefore, you should give cash, right? If you don't have cash, let's say you don't have cash, okay, right? But what's the whole point? They're getting money for the sake of their poor meal, right? In other words, that money is being used, so they can use on poor. So if you give a post-dated check, they can't do that, right? Normally they wouldn't be able to cash it, right? So obviously better to give better to give cash. On that note, there's a question: what do you give more of on just on this topic? Do you give shachmanos, food gifts, or money, right? Or money to the poor? Now, it's obligation to give at least 2 food gifts. Should be readily edible. Yeah, some people give, let's say, like a can of soda, or like a croissant, or they'll give candy. Sometimes people give a sandwich. Some people give, I don't know, they do it with themes. They do all kinds of different things. The obligation is to give at least 2, because that's what the verse says, right? It says in the book of Esther, it says in the plural, right? It doesn't say shalach mano, doesn't say give 1. It says shalach manos, send in plural. What do we normally say in plural? At least 2. Right, at least 2. Now, some people give a lot, okay, but what's the bigger mitzvah? More food gifts to people to bring about friendship, or to give money to the poor? The bigger mitzvah is to give money to the poor, right? That is the bigger mitzvah. So a person could skimp, and give. Maybe they'll give to their neighbors, they'll give to some friends. Okay, they're not going to give like 40 or 50. I mean, they could in theory, but let's say they give, I don't know, they give a handful. They give a handful. They give, I don't know, let's say they give 10. Okay. Yeah, whatever a person has, the rest should be given to poor people, whatever a person could give. So the most important thing is that you give according to what you're able to give. But you should definitely be giving more money to poor people than you are to people that you're sending food gifts to. Yeah, again, sending food gifts is an important thing. That's very true, right? That 100% is very true. The issue is, what's better? Spend more on that, or spend, more giving, money to charity to help widows, orphans, and people that need, right? So obviously, it's better to give people in need than to give these food gifts, right? Again, people, I think, get a little bit carried away. I mean, with giving these things, I mean, you can make it very simple. It doesn't have to be expensive. Obviously, people you're closer to, you get more, I guess, more fancier things, whatever it may be. Okay, but I would say, if there's a choice, right? If there's a choice, and it is brought down, it's very clear that money to the poor comes first, right? Money to the poor comes first. Now, who's considered a poor person? People struggle. People seriously in debt. They don't have to be seriously in debt. I saw something written, but someone was bringing down a lot of these laws, put together in a pamphlet or whatever. And one of the things he put there was about giving, who's considered someone who's poor, right? Giving money to the poor. So his answer was, well, one opinion was, you give to someone who doesn't make it to the end of the month. Yeah, someone basically was in the minus by the end of the month. So it's kind of, why do I laugh? Because a lot of people are in the minus at the end of the month. That's how most people, a lot of people in Israel live. They end up in the minus. Like 80% of the country is probably in the minus. Whatever. Yeah, I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's kind of the reality, though. But in general, right? In general, that would be the case. You give to anybody, right? According to that, be able to give to anybody. What about people who don't work and they just go around synagogue, place to place collecting? Collecting for themselves, not collecting for other people, collecting for themselves. There are plenty of people out there, doing that. And the whole question: can you really give to them on Purim? Because these people are not, even though they're doing it, doesn't mean they're poor, right? It certainly doesn't mean they're poor. And as the joke is, they're probably doing better than most of us, put together. Because people give to them, and I'm not going into whether they should or they shouldn't, or a person going around collecting and not working, and maybe they can't work, and maybe they've got health issues, got other things. Okay, it's kind of embarrassing to do such a thing. Some people don't care, and they do relatively well, right? So giving to them, maybe don't fulfill your obligation, because they're doing better than other people. So it is kind of a tricky thing, in a certain way. But there are plenty of people out there that need help. That's for sure, right? That is for sure. So giving to people who need, a big mitzvah, right? A big mitzvah. Helping them. Now, what happens? If they get money, let's say they have money for the meal. Let's say they have money for the meal, right? The whole point of giving is so they have their needs met, for the holiday. Okay, so let's say their needs are met, but they still need help, right? Regardless of whether they, they use the money for the meal or not. I'm not saying if they have money for the meal, they can use, part of the money, make it fancier. I mean, it should be a fancy meal, right? But they want to make it fancier. Okay, they can do that. Are they obligated to do that? Not obligated. I mean, it's going to be, it should be a fancy meal, that's for sure. I mean, it should be a big spread. That's the mitzvah of the day. But that's how, that is the downfall of Achashverosh. It came at this meal, right? It became at this, this elegant meal, right, so to speak. So, a meal fit for a king, no pun intended, right? So so it should be a fancy meal. Definitely should be a fancy meal. Now again, if they have all their needs met, can they use the money for other things? Yes. They're certainly allowed to, right? So people should be out, right? People who need, it's long, and you got to be careful also, because you're going to give to someone, they have to be really in need, because at the very least you have to give to two people, right? You have to give to two poor people, and the money has to get to them on that day. You have to know they're in hardship, right? They're really in hardship. So in that case, right? In that case, if that is true, you certainly fulfill. Again, if a person feels, let's say, a person feels embarrassed, they don't want to give to someone directly, then give to someone else. Give to someone else to give to them, right? But usually, again, in that same thing, most people in a community, there are a bunch of people that are collecting for specific families. Could be two families, three families, could be more. I don't know, whatever it is, a minimum of two. So you are relying on them. If they're reliable people, now the question will be, can I rely on them? They're saying I'm giving to two poor people on the day of Purim. Okay, so if they have believability, then you can rely on them. Now, if you have a doubt, then don't give it to them. Give it to someone else. Yeah. If you don't know them, what if you don't know them? Yeah. The assumption is, unless you hear otherwise, there's no reason to think. There is no reason to think that somebody is pulling the wool over your eyes, right? And the reason is, as a general rule, there's a general rule that a person has what we call cheskas kashrus. They are considered kosher Jews unless you know otherwise. Unless you know they're shady, unless you know they've done things, you know, they've done things wrong. Even though everybody does things wrong, that's not the point. But they did things wrong. They can't be trusted. They can't be trusted. So if they can't be trusted, okay, that's if you know. And what if you don't know? What if you don't know? The assumption is that you can rely on them. Do you have to investigate them? No, you don't necessarily have to investigate them. But as long as you haven't heard anything negative, then you can rely on them, right? It's the same thing, a little bit different, but it's similar. Someone comes to synagogue, they tell the one that's giving out Aliyah is giving calling people to Torah. He tells this person, I'm a Kohen. Yeah, now the person's not going to say, well, how do you know you're Kohen? You're not going to grill him, right? Unless he knows there's a doubt or there's something, there's an issue. So in other words, the person says, I'm a Kohen, they call him up as Kohen. Yeah? So let's say the guy's lying. Let's say the guy's lying, he's not a Kohen. Okay. But that's not usually going to be the case, right? Most people know if they're a Kohen or a Levite, right? Something's passed down generation, not something written per se. There are some people that have actually, pedigree, it's written down, whatever, they have documents. Okay, most people probably don't. But the assumption is, let's make this very clear. The assumption is that if someone says they're a Kohen or a Levite, I don't have to check them out. I don't have to grill them, right? If you happen to know the person, and there's an issue in the family, that's a different issue, right? But otherwise, the same thing. We leave them on their cheskes kashrus. They stay as kosher Jews unless you know otherwise. Now, this came up also. Someone, let's say, gets married. So, going to go in front of, let's say, a rabbi or whatever, or a rabbinical court, let's say, and they're going to say, okay, do you have proof that you're Jewish? So they'll probably ask for, a community member, rabbi, usually, if they know the family. That knows the family, to write a letter saying they know the family to be Jewish, right? So, so when I got married, here I had a letter from rabbi who knew my family, and even though chief rabbi didn't know who this person was, but it doesn't really matter. So he wrote a letter saying basically he knew 4 or 5 generations, right, of my family, and to bring out the witnesses, whatever, that uncles will verify that I was Jewish, whatever. So very good. Now, question comes. It's not really a question. I'm just gonna put it out there. So this rabbi says, I know, let's say 5 generations, 4 generations. Let's say 4 generations. I know 4 generations of that family to be Jewish. Very good. So then a person could say, what about the 5th generation? He's not vouching for the 5th generation. Very good. Because he doesn't know the 5th generation. He knows 4 generations. Right? He knows 4 generations. Okay. Now, do we have to assume there's a problem in the 5th generation? Or the 10th generation? Right? Then someone will say, but, a person, let's say, it's Baal Tshuva, they come back to Judaism and say, see, you could have somewhere down the line, 10th generation before, and the person wasn't, I don't know, maybe there was a false conversion somewhere, maybe something happened. So all the blessings, all the things you're doing weren't nothing. Because you weren't Jewish. What's the simple answer? The simple answer is I don't have to worry about that. Why not? Even if this rabbi doesn't know 5th generation. You're not going to find anybody who knows 5th generation, right? They have to be 120 years old, 150 years old. So no one's going to be able to go that far back, usually. Yeah? So even if I know 4 generations, or even 3 generations, I don't have to assume, and this is the same idea, just throwing it out there, you do not have to assume there's a problem. Why would I make problems? We got enough problems, as it is. Why would I invent a problem, and cause all kinds of aggravation when there's no reason to think there's a problem? If you found out in the third generation, in a previous generation, there was a quasi conversion. Yeah, there was a form of conservative conversion or whatever. Yeah. Then you call it into question. Then you got to bring proof. Okay. But if I don't have that, and there's absolutely no reason to think that, you're going to leave the person, as we said before, you're going to leave them on their chazaka. The chazaka means we know over time that this thing stands to be true. We don't have any reason to think it's not true, right? A person, I'll give an example. A person's living in a house, been living there, for a number of years. Yeah. Do I have to make an assumption he stole it from somebody? Why would I have to make such an assumption? Oh, someone comes and claims you stole this land from my father. Yeah, he said, I've been living there for 20 years. Yeah, 20 years ago, you stole it from my father. Right? Now it's called into question. Okay. So the person making the accusation, he's got to bring proof. Why does he have to bring proof? Because you're living there 20 years. You're living there 20 years. Yeah. Squatters' rights, we might call it. Yeah. Because if you're there for a certain amount of years and no one said anything and no one complained, 3 years, right? If a person, let's say, living on a piece of property for 3 years, yeah, for 3 years, no one said anything. Nobody said boo. Person's living there, has raised his family there, whatever. Nobody said anything. Is there any reason to think that's not his property? 3 years is the limit. If someone comes 5 years later, yeah, or 6 years later, or more, and they're going to make the claim, you stole this property from my father, or my brother, or whoever, never really belonged to you, you took it, and you stole it, right? Ruvain says that to Shimon, knocks on the door. What's Shimon going to say? I've been here for 10 years. Who are you? Yeah. So, I'm Levi's brother. Okay, very good. Levi's son. Okay. It really belonged to Levi. My father. We'll make it easy. My father. Okay. You got proof? You have any proof? Right? He wants to drag him to Beis Din. He wants to take the rabbinical court. He says, take me. I got nothing to hide. They go to Beis Din. What is the Beis Din? What's the rabbinical court going to ask them? It's going to ask Reuven over here, what's your claim? And he's going to claim this person living in this house illegally. Yeah. He's been living illegally for years. Yeah, been there for years. Okay. Been there for 10 years. So what's the Beis going to ask? So why didn't you come before? Why didn't you make a claim before? So he was out of town. He didn't hear about it. Whatever. He's got to bring proof. He's got to bring proof that he stole it. If he doesn't have proof, if he's there more than 3 years, that's it. Squatter's rights. It belongs to him. Now, why would it belong to him? Because nobody came along and said it didn't belong to him. Nobody made a peep. All of a sudden, this guy comes out of nowhere and says, he stole this land. If someone's living in a place for 3 years, the general rule is that it belongs to them. After 3 years, you can't make a claim. How can you make a claim? Nobody said anything for 3 years. Say, I was out of the country. I didn't know about it. Okay, let's see if you got an excuse. But usually 3 years is no. 3 years, nobody says anything. It should belong to you. So Reuven over here is going to have to bring ample proof that it belongs to the family. That Shimon stole it from his father. If he doesn't have proof, they throw him out. He has no claim. They could throw him out, yeah, even without his claim. Why? Because if the general rule is you have a chazaka after 3 years, it belongs to you. No one said anything after 3 years, right? What's basically going to ask is, hey, Shimon, how long have you been living there? 10 years. But living there 10 years. Let's say 3.5 years. We'll make it easy. 3.5 years. Yeah, 3.5 years. He says, okay. The basin could ask him, okay, in 3 years, 3.5 years, did anyone ever come and like ask you about the property? No. Anyone ever make a claim that it belongs to someone else? No. Anyone make a claim about anything? No. They go to Reuven and say, get out of here. What are you wasting our time for? Yeah. You weren't there for 3 years. I don't care what you were doing. Your other side of the world, 3 years have passed. That's it. That should be enough time. And the reason they use 3 years as an example, right, of this is because within 3 years, even if a person on the other side of the world, even back then, they would have heard about it. Somehow they would have heard over time, they would have heard someone was squatting on that property. Right? Today's very easy because everything's instantaneous. But back then, you're thousands of miles away. You have no idea what's going on. There's no communication, right? Or very little communication. So they give up to 3 years to find out. 3 years should be enough time to find out. After 3 years, if there's been no complaint, nobody said anything. Yeah. Nobody said boo. They don't have a claim at all. They should not have a claim at all. Right? Because he could have found out. And the fact that they could have found out, guess what? You didn't say anything. That means it's not yours. That's what it means. They could be jumping up and down, screaming and saying, I'm on the other side of the world. I had no idea. No one contacted. They could have contacted him. Right? Today, you would never have that claim. You would never have that claim today. Someone's going to find out. Certainly within a year, within half a year, easily. Someone should be able to find out. But even if you're talking way back, where communication was much more limited, yeah. So Rabbi said, okay, we'll give you 3 years. 3 years is enough time to find out. If after 3 years nobody says anything, it's yours. Right? So they wouldn't even entertain this conversation unless he had to have overwhelming proof why he could not have found out. You say he was in a coma for 3 years. Okay. Most people are not going to be in a coma for 3 years. There has to be something like really, really substantial for them to even listen to the case. Yeah, they're not going to listen to the case. Unless it has to be something like so unbelievably substantial that he's got an absolute excuse why I can never have heard. 3 years is plenty of time. Right? So again, in that case, and there are other cases as well, that, they say if it ain't broken, I don't have to fix it. Right? Meaning, why bring up problems you don't have to bring up? There's no reason to. Right? But again, what's the claim? What could be the claim? The claim could be, but you don't know what happened in the 4th generation of your family or the 5th generation. So if you don't know what happened in those generations, very good. What could I say? Very easily. You can say, you don't know, you don't know what happened. Okay, so bring me proof something happened. Show me something where I'd have to worry about it. If there's no reason to worry about, we are not making problems. There's no reason to. So yeah, but you don't know concrete, but there's an idea. This is what happens when you lack knowledge in Torah. And it's not the person's fault because they never really learned, so it's not their fault. Right? But there's such a thing called the chazaka. If I have a chazaka and I know this to be true, yeah, I don't have to turn over the world to find out it's not true unless, this is a very important point, unless I know there's an issue. If I don't know there's an issue, and there's never been, let's say, my own family's never been into marriage in previous generations. Yeah, talking 4 or 5 generations back or more, right? In earlier generations, right? The last few generations, plenty of intermarriage. Okay, but let's go back 5 generations, right? My great-great-grandparents' generation, they didn't intermarry. Yeah, no intermarriage. Very few people, if any, intermarried. Even way back when. They might not have been religious, they didn't intermarry. Right? In general. Intermarriage has been a big problem in the last 100 years, maybe a little more, right? But more than 200 years ago, 300 years ago, never, right? Very rare, very very rare, right? So if you know there's an issue with a great grandparent because of intermarriage, that calls it into question. Great, I don't have a problem with that. So then you got to look for information. Okay, but if I don't have that issue, the assumption is, and it's a very good assumption, unless you know otherwise, the assumption is going to be that I have a problem. Why? Because we are going to assume Jews are kosher. Right? Previous generations, I can assume that. Today, maybe not. But even today's generation, I know the parents are Jewish. Yeah. I know the grandparents are Jewish. The great grandparents were Jewish on the mother's side. They don't have to be religious, per se. But they're Jewish. Even if they intermarried, kids are still Jewish. Okay. Unless there was an intermarriage on the mother's side 3 generations before or more, yeah, you heard something, whatever, then you have to investigate. Otherwise, you leave the person as is because we don't assume their problems, right? You only assume there's a problem when there's a problem. Yeah, you don't make problems, right? You're not interested in making, problems. I give another example. It's not really connected to this case. One of my kids got married, and as they were filling out the ksuba, the marriage document, so that the yeshiva, my son-in-law asked, name, for my name. So yeah, so I gave my name. I said, but I could have been called this. He goes, I don't want any problems. He's like, we don't need any problems over here. Don't make me any problems. Just tell me, what is your name? Very simple. Just give me the name, right? That is the rule of thumb. Not to make problems. Yeah, I make problems, but in general, you don't make problems if you don't have to. Yeah. And if there are problems, okay, you got to deal with it. Right? And if it's possible to solve it, very good. If it's not possible to solve it, okay. But I'm not looking for problems. Right? I don't have to make assumptions if there are no assumptions there. Yeah, you don't know what happened before the 5th generation. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because there's no questions. There are no issues. But you don't know that for a fact. I do know that for a fact. You have to bring proof that, or someone has to bring proof that that's not true. Yeah? And there's no reason to think it's not true. Then why bother? No one's going to bother. Right? You leave the person as a kosher Jew unless I have an assumption to say they're not. Right? Do you have any assumption to say I'm not or my family's not? No. Doesn't matter. You didn't do research or whatever. No assumption. No assumption. But your family, rampage, within the marriage. Good. Second cousins, third cousins. Okay. We're not talking intermarriage, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. On my mother's side, should be well. Nothing. There's nothing there. Zero. I have to go digging for it. No pun intended. I have to go digging up something that doesn't exist, or there's very good chance it doesn't exist, but it might. So what? Yeah, England of herself. There's no end, right? Say, oh, maybe this could have happened. Maybe that could have happened. Maybe something else could have happened. Yeah, maybe. And my grandmother had will, she'd be a bus. Okay, so what? It doesn't prove anything. You can make an assumption. What's the assumption based on? Nothing. If the assumption is based on nothing, you got nothing to worry about. If it's based on something, okay. Then you have to check it out. Then you have to look into it. But if I don't have an issue, do I have to look into it? Why in the world would I have to look into it? There's no reason to. It's making problems for no reason. That you don't have to do. You're not obligated to do unless there's an issue. right? And even in case someone wants to convert, right? I think I met one family over the last 30 years that they were probably Jewish. At least one of the spouses was probably Jewish. Even though rabbinical courts, still told them they had to break Shabbos, every Shabbos till they converted. Okay. The other spouse had to convert anyway, so it didn't really matter, right? But at the end of the day, finding the proof is going to be very hard, extremely hard to find. Yeah, and even if you do find certain level of proof, they're still probably going to make you go through conversion anyway. They'll rely on it anyway, a lot of it. Yeah, so it doesn't matter, right? It's better go through conversion anyway. And usually, anyway, it really doesn't come down to that because most people never find the proof anyway. And the proof is either a marriage document from a grandparent or great grandparent, or buried in a Jewish cemetery 4 generations. Those things are going to be almost impossible to find. Just about impossible. And almost every single person I've dealt with in such a case, and they look for proof, they never found. Right? Even in the one case that they were probably Jewish, also didn't find. Also didn't find. They can check, they can look. Doesn't it's not going to change their status per se. Probably still going to have to go through conversion anyway. But that's a different issue. If you have some level of proof. But even if you have some level of proof, yeah, there are people that are, what do you call it? What do they call them? Anusim, B'nai Anusim. They were people that converted on the outside of Christianity, but really practiced Judaism. Yeah, so they were Jews. Very good. But most of them probably have to convert anyway, even if they came from these families, because at some point, one of the mothers, grandmother, great grandmother, somewhere down the line, wasn't Jewish, and there was no conversion. Yeah, so most of them have to convert anyway. Now, some of them, depending, right? Some of them, depending, maybe they don't have to convert. Okay, that's a different issue. That's a very different issue. But I think a lot of them will have to anyway. Just to be safe. But in either case, these are things that there are issues. Okay, so you want to try and verify the issue, and instead of going through this whole process. I get it. I tell people you want to look, you can look. You can look all over. You can this, you can that. DNA test doesn't really matter. Not going to prove anything either way, right? Even if it shows you have a certain percentage of being Jewish, doesn't matter, right? We're not going to look at that as proof anyway. So I said you can look. You probably won't find the proof. If you do find proof, not sure a biblical court's going to look at it anyway. But even so, you're probably not going to find proof, and you have to go through it anyway. Right? You have to learn anyway, either way. Right? So it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter, if you find the proof or not. The only question would be, do you have to desecrate Shabbos or not? That's the question. And in most cases, it's going to desecrate Shabbos anyway, unless you have very, very strong evidence otherwise. Right? Which is, I think is going to be very rare. I had somebody that's, where were they? They're born in Nicaragua. Yeah. So they said, mother was Jewish, grandmother was Jewish, whatever. I said, do you have any proof in a Jewish cemetery? He said, no. So when Noriega came to power, they demolished all the Jewish cemeteries, and all the records have been gone. So that's it. You have to convert, right? But they could be Jewish. I don't know. Very well could be Jewish. Yeah. If what they're saying is true, okay, but they have no records. They have no proof. Right? And they'll never find proof because, when he came to power, they totally destroyed, all the cemeteries, all Jewish cemeteries, wherever they were. Europe's like that, for sure, like that. Also, someone had, some Jewish blood somewhere, I don't know, Poland, that's other place. A lot of these cemeteries destroyed. Totally destroyed. So how are you going to find proof? In either case, it's better not to be Jewish anyway. Yeah, in that case, and then you learn and whatever, so it's easier, right? It's an easier time in the sense where, even though you still have to desecrate, Shabbos and festivals and all that, okay. Even if you have to do that, still, the learning curve is easier, and it can take longer without greater repercussions. 'Cause the person actually found out they're Jewish, now they're going to start keeping. Okay, God's going to take it in mind, but you don't know how to keep Shabbos. You know how to keep kosher. You don't know how to do any of these things, right? So now what do you do? So okay, you got to take like a crash course, so to speak, but you're going to have to learn quite a bit in a short amount of time to make sure you don't transgress as a Jew. So it's better to be a non-Jew, right? In that sense. So then it's easier, right? In that sense. Yeah, but again, God's gonna cut a person some slack, I'm sure. If they just find out they're Jewish now, they're not gonna be able to keep everything, right? They're not gonna be able to keep everything because it's gonna be too hard, right? They don't have enough knowledge. So God's gonna take that into account. But a person's gotta get the knowledge. Now that they want to learn, it's not okay taking stuff in sound bites. I mean, it is to a point, but you gotta keep what you need to keep. You gotta do what you need to do. So okay, it's gonna take in steps. Very good. Right? So they'll be like about tshuva, okay. So you take it in steps. I'd say it'd be better to be a non-Jew, then it's easier. It's easier in that sense. But God will probably cut you a lot of slack also. Right? That would be my assumption. Even if you found out now, you're not gonna be able to keep everything the way you need to. Right? So you take it step by step. So that'll be all right. Right? That would be, God's gonna cut you some slack on that. Because you're just finding out now. So now all of a sudden, person in their 40s, who knows why they find out they're Jewish. Right? They find out they're actually bona fide halachically Jewish. Very good. Okay, so now you can start keeping Shabbos. You have no idea about Shabbos. You can't even read Hebrew. Yeah. How are you going to make blessings? How are you going to do these other things? God's not going to throw the book at you because you're ignorant. Right? You got to learn. Right? You're going to have to learn. You have to take it step by step. Right? So God's going to take that in consideration. Okay. Yeah. So, if person had the proof or whatever, good. But it's very rare. It's very rare today if anyone's actually going to find the proof. And even if they found certain proof, Basin will probably make them go through conversion anyway just to be safe. There's a story one Basin that somebody came in with like a folder of documentation, and started like reading and started, telling the story and what was going on. So the head of so they put the material in in this folder or whatever. And they gave it to the head of the basin. So the head of the basin took this folder and just put it to the side. Didn't even open it. Now, in this case, there was one case someone told me about, where somebody actually knew grandparents or great grandparents knew them to be Jewish living in a certain city. Yeah, even though let's say they weren't religious. Okay. Even that, they weren't necessarily, willing to accept 100% to say they were Jewish. Person's alive. Yeah, person, certainly could testify and say, they knew them to be Jewish living in this community, back in the old home in Europe. That people knew them, or actually it was in America. Actually, it was in America. They knew them to be Jewish in this community, like, decades ago. Many, many decades ago. And still, not willing to convert based on that evidence. Yeah, so with all these things, most likely a rabbinical court is going to make them convert anyway. It's just safer. But anyway, the point of all this is we're not looking for problems. Yeah, we got enough. We definitely have enough problems. A lot of messy issues to deal with in general, right? It's better if you don't have to make any new ones. And you don't have to assume something is wrong unless there's an issue. And if there isn't an issue, I'm not looking for problems, right? They're just, there could be issues, right? There certainly could be issues if there are issues. Very good. And if they're not, a person has to dig in their family history to find a problem, to find a potential problem. No one's saying you do that. Nobody. It's a total waste of time and effort. It's not going to do anything. Yeah. So, well, maybe this could happen. Maybe that could happen. So we say, we say in halachic terms, end with the bar sof. There's no end. Maybe this could have happened. That could have happened. The other thing could have happened. Yeah. It's like the mission in the beginning of Pesachim talks about checking your house for chametz, for any leavened product. Say, oh, maybe you're checking a house and a weasel came in, or a rat, or a mouse. Actually, a mouse came in. Yeah, so do I have to assume the mouse maybe found the crumb and took it somewhere and spread it all over? Right? Think of this case, think of that case, think the other case. And what does the Mishnah say over there? The Mishnah says, if you think of all these cases, he took this, he took that, drive you absolutely crazy. And with the Varsov, I don't have to make assumptions here. There's no end. There's no end. Yeah. If I didn't see the mouse, do I have to assume there was a mouse that came and took a cracker, bit it, this, that, and went all over the house, and now I have to check the whole house? Right? It has to be something realistic. Right? It can't be just something, made up and far-fetched, and, someone's going to come along and say, oh, but, we saw the mouse go in. Very good. What did he go in with? Do you have anything in his mouth? Do you see anything? I have to assume he had a cracker and he ran. Oh, we saw him with a cracker in his mouth. Oh, that's different. You saw him with a cracker in his mouth. Now the cracker could be anywhere. Yeah, there could be crumbs anywhere. Okay. Yeah, but if you didn't, if you saw him come in, he didn't have anything in his mouth. My assumption should be he probably took something and now he's all over the place. Now I have to check everything. It has to be a specific thing. You saw something. Now I got an issue. Okay. Now I got an issue. And before that, do I have an issue? No. Now, do I have to assume there's a problem if there's no issue? No. Again, this is related to so many different things. So many different things. Yeah. So we don't make assumptions over here. We don't have to make assumptions, right? I'll give you another case. A kosher Jew. Yeah, you take someone who's a kosher Jew, known to keep Torah mitzvahs. You see him in a compromise, or her in a compromising position. Whatever that compromising position is, whether something maybe looks fraudulent, it's in business, I don't know, something. Yeah, you don't know the facts. You don't know the facts. Now, are you obligated over here to assume this person's guilty? Now, this person keeps Torah mitzvahs. Now, does that mean that everybody's perfect? No. Can a person sin? Absolutely. Yeah, but this person's known to be a kosher Jew, right? Let's say. So now, scandal comes up. Unless I know otherwise, there's an absolute mitzvah, positive command to judge the person favorably. Yeah, it could be. I could guard myself maybe against the person. I can't believe it outright. And there's a mitzvah to judge them positively. Now, I'll go to the other extreme. If it's somebody who doesn't keep Torah mitzvah, and they're found in a compromising position, whatever that compromising position is, there's a mitzvah the other way. I do not have to assume they're pure and clean over here. Just the opposite. Since they don't keep Torah mitzvahs, I have to believe them for anything. If they were telling me what time it is right now and it's the same time, I don't have to believe them. Yeah, they have no believability whatsoever. So there's no mitzvah to believe them. Zero mitzvah to see them in a positive light. Right? They don't keep kosher. They don't keep Shabbos. I'm not even saying they're intermarried. They don't have to be intermarried. Right? They don't keep any of these things. What believability do they have? They shouldn't have too much believability. Now, so those are two extremes. Now, somebody's righteous, right? Obviously, we go according to the first thing. I absolutely have a mitzvah to believe that they didn't do anything wrong. Now, if we know people that are in the middle, right? Let's say most of us are in the middle, and you see someone in a compromising position, same thing. There's an obligation to judge them favorably. You have a mitzvah to judge them favorably, even where it's hard to judge them favorably. What's the reason? Because they keep Torah mitzvah. The assumption is they probably didn't do it, right? They probably didn't do it. Now, what if it's, all over the newspapers? I know people still read the newspapers, all over the internet. This person's been accused X, Y, and Z. Can't believe it. It's Lashon Hara. Yeah. If in the end it comes out to be true, okay. Yeah. And the person's guilty, okay. But even in a compromising situation, right, with someone who keeps Torah mitzvahs, you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Even when it's hard. Even seemingly where it's impossible. You still have to give them the benefit of the doubt. There's a mitzvah, there's an obligation to give them the benefit of the doubt. If you find out otherwise, yeah, you find out otherwise that, what they were accused of is true, and you know it to be true, okay? Right? That's a different issue. But again, how do you know 100% what's the truth? You only hear from what news reporters say, what the internet says, right? And it could be a totally different story. Could be. But what if they get in a court of law and they're guilty? Okay, it's a different issue. Right? That very well is a different issue. But from the outset, there's a mitzvah judged favorably. Even if it looks really bad. Yeah. Because they have believability. Doesn't mean they're perfect. Doesn't mean they're God themselves. That's not the point. They have believability. Why? Because they're trying to do the right thing on a daily basis. So therefore, I have to give them the benefit of the doubt, even when it looks really bad. Someone who doesn't have that level of believability, no mitzvah for me to do it at all. Just the opposite. I can assume they're guilty. Why? Because if they're guilty of doing all these other things, against God and potentially against man as well. We'll just leave God. Well, we won't talk about man. Just between them and God and what they don't do, right? What they don't do against him. Very good. So therefore, why would I assume that they're not guilty? You say, but you don't know. But they have a history. The history is that they don't keep Torah and mitzvahs, they have no moral compass in general. Yeah, they have nothing guiding them. Their heart is guiding them. Yeah. So some people will say, but you don't know what's in their heart. You can't say that. You can't judge. You're right. I can't judge. But my assumption is, if they don't keep Shabbos, they don't keep kosher, they're not going to be the most moral people in other ways. Some ways, maybe. Cut them a little bit of slack. Maybe in some ways. Yeah, they're honest. Okay. I don't have to assume that. Definitely not. Why would they be honest? Now you say, sometimes there are people that are honest. They're honest in all their dealings. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to be that naive. I don't think it's true. Because if they don't have a moral compass, why would they be? What would be the reason? Because in their heart. They have a lot of things in their heart. But I would say 95% of things in their heart are bad. They go against Torah mitzvahs. So if they go against Torah mitzvahs, these 5% are good. Okay, very good. I'm saying they're rotten to the core. I'm not going to go that far. I'm not going to throw everyone under the bus. But I guarantee a lot of things, yes. And very easy to nitpick at it. Very easy. Do they curse? Yes, most likely. They speak Lashon Hara? 100%. Motei Shemra, libel against people, lying, different things? 100%. 100%. No doubt. Some people do it more. Some people do it less. But if they don't have a moral compass, what's stopping them? What's stopping them? So someone said, someone say I'm a good person. I said, so define that. You don't cheat on your taxes. That makes you good? I said, what's the definition? Once they saw where this was going, they stopped the conversation. But what's the definition? What's good? You cut off your father's pacemaker and killed him. Is that good? No, that's mercy. That's mercy. They want to see him suffer. So I'm not guilty of that. I can find 1.5 million things, right? This is the question. You can have the nicest of people. They can be the nicest of people. I hear this all the time. This person was so nice. Okay. They were very nice. They had a good reputation and business, other things. Okay. Let me ask you the $1 million question. They can be the nicest people. Nobody cares about nice people. What we care about, the bottom line is, in God's eyes, are they nice? Are they doing things that God wants them to do? Now, maybe some things they do that God's gonna like. They helped their parents. They gave charity. They did some good things. Okay. Now, if I would put it on a scale, the number of good things they did in God's eyes, the way the Torah looks at it, not the way we think, the way the Torah looks at it. Now, I have two sides of the scale, right? The good things that they actually did according to the Torah, and the things they did that were not according to the Torah. My guess would be, again, you can take this with a grain of salt, but my guess would be that on the side of, things not in accordance with Torah is going to be much greater by infinity than the side that they did things that kept Torah. What's my proof? What's a very simple proof? Very simple proof is most people speak badly against others, even if what they say is true, which is still Lashon Hara. How many prohibitions are there in speaking Lashon Hara? Over 30. 30, right? Over 30. I think it's 36, actually. Let me just, 1 second. I think it's 36. I could be wrong. 6 negative 1 second. 31, sorry. 31. Okay, it's off by 5. 31. There are 31 prohibitions of speaking Lashon Hara. Now, positive and negative commands. Now, let's say when they spoke, whenever they spoke Lashon Hara, let's say. There's 31 prohibitions every time they open their mouth. 31 prohibitions. Now, on that side of the scale, how many times a day, we could guess, how many times a day they speak Lashon Hara against somebody when it was forbidden? I'm not saying where it's permissible, where it's forbidden. 10? 20? 30? I think the number is even higher. Because people speak all the time against other people. That's what they do. A lot of times. Not everybody, but a lot of times. So I'll be generous. Let's say it's 30. I think it's a lot higher than that. But let's say, 30 times 31 is what? 900, right? 930. That's a lot in a day. Now, what are the good things they do? You're going to come up to 1,000 in a day? I don't know about that. I'm not sure you're going to come close to that, right? Because there's going to be many more things on the other side. Now, someone's going to say, you don't know what's in their heart. You're right. I don't really care what's in their heart. I care what people do. That's what the Torah cares about. Torah doesn't care what you think, because words in my heart don't mean anything in general, right? As the Talmudic dictum is, Devarim shebalev eino devarim. Words in my heart don't matter. Okay. What matters according to Torah is what I do. That's what matters. Now, if that's what matters, and people are doing, exponentially, which I just mentioned speaking Lashon Hara. I didn't mention anything else. I could mention desecration of Shabbos, even if they don't know what they're doing. If they grew up as a potato farmer in Idaho, right? No offense, anyone's a potato farmer grew up in Idaho. I could mention a whole laundry list of things. So you tell me, God's not going to throw the book at them. They never learned. Okay, whatever. What? So they could be the nicest people in the world. If we were playing God, how would we look at it? God's going to cut them some slack for sure. But how are we going to look at it in general? They're guilty. They're seriously guilty of not doing what God wants them to do. That has nothing to do with what I think, because nobody cares what I think. It's about what a person does in God's eyes. Very good. So now that scale on the one side is going down to infinity. The scale on the other side is not moving up very much. But again, what do we get bogged down with? We get bogged down with the idea that someone's going to say, but the person was the nicest person in the world. Okay. I'm not denying that. I'm not denying they do good things. Right? I'm not denying that. But compared to, in God's eyes, are they good? Maybe some of them. Maybe some things are good. But most things I guarantee, because there's so many prohibitions, Torah prohibitions, I'm not even looking for rabbinical prohibitions, right? So many Torah prohibitions that they're going to be wiped off the face of the map. Not even close, right? They eat treif. How many times they eat treif a day? And what that does to the soul. I mean, the list goes on. How many times they curse? Yeah, I can think of a million things. A million things. But what do people get caught up in? But the person was the nicest person. I didn't say they weren't. That wasn't the question. The question was in God's eyes. That was the question. And in God's eyes, I would think they don't smell so good. Yeah. Again, is God going to cut them some slack because they never learned or whatever? Yes. Probably cut them a lot of slack, right? It doesn't change the facts. Doesn't change the fact, oh, such a nice person. Okay. Had a heart of gold. Very good. That's worth something. That for sure is worth something. But does that knock off all the treif they ate? Does it knock off all the Shabbos they desecrated? Does it knock off all the Lashon Hara they spoke? Whether they knew about it or not? It's an endless list. It's an endless list. It's not, it's like, oh, you're nitpicking. It's not nitpicking. These are basic tenets of Judaism that they're trampling on a daily basis. Oh, but they're the nicest of people. What does that have to do with anything? Yeah, they could be the nicest of people. And God's going to take that into account, right? So my question would be, is that going to override all the other things they do that are bad in God's eyes? That's going to be the question. Yeah, so you're saying you're not God, you don't know. Good. My guess is they're not going to offset. And there's going to be, some serious level of punishment, but they get rewarded for what they've done. Okay. Yeah. But I think that scale is going to be very much weighted on one side, right? It's going to be on the negative side. Because there's no possible way it can be on the good side because they don't do what God says. They don't care what God says. And again, that's a rebellion, even if they don't know anything. Okay. So again, we'll cut them a little bit of slack. But it doesn't matter if they're good and they're, and they're the nicest people. They could be the nicest people. Could very well be the nicest people. I don't think the nicest of people in this world, unless they have some mitzvah or mitzvahs they've done, that, it's going to take them over the top regardless of what they've done negatively. Right? That's far-fetched. That I can't imagine. Could be. They did one mitzvah with unbelievable self-sacrifice, right? It knocks off a lot of these things. Okay. Yeah. That could happen. Not gonna say it can't happen. It could happen. Yeah, what are the odds? I don't know. I don't think so high. I definitely don't think so high. But a person gets caught up in this. Oh, the nicest of people. I just heard someone that I knew many years ago. Let's say, whatever. When I was a kid, I mean, lost contact over the years for many years. So the person died, suffered. I don't know. I don't even know what the person had, but last 2 years the person just died. I just heard yesterday. Yesterday, that person died. Okay. Now, it's a good example. A lot of people that came in contact with this person, yeah, loves them. They're very well liked. Okay. They keep Torah mitzvahs? No. They come close to keeping Torah mitzvahs? No. They trade? Yeah. They do other things? Yeah. Could be the nicest guy in the world. Right? When I was growing up, I was a kid, the nicest guy in the world. God doesn't care about the nicest guy in the world. He wants to know, bottom line, what'd you do? What'd you do in your life? What'd you do for me? For the sake of Torah, what'd you do? You ate trade for your life? What'd you do? I sent you with a message. You totally destroyed it. Said I helped other people. Okay, good. You helped other people. Okay, it's worth something. Is that totally going to offset all the other things he didn't do? Again, we're going to have a hard enough time answering for ourselves. Yeah, but that's not the point. Right? The point is about what we do. That's what God cares about. Did you keep my Torah? Did you keep my mitzvahs? Well, I ate a little bit of matzah on Passover. Yeah, but you mix it with chametz, right? Here's the thought that counts. I don't know. If you don't get it right, it's payback. It's not about being nice. That's not part of the equation. Again, you get brownie points. God can say, yeah, people loved him. He's a good person. He did chesed, did acts of loving kindness. We're saying everyone's evil. Not going to go that far. And they're doing things just, because they're doing it as a rebellion. It is a rebellion, but it's all based on desire. But we're going to call that good? God's eyes, not our eyes. How's God going to judge? So someone will say, you get upstairs after 120 years, you'll see how God's going to judge it. You're right. But my guess is, based on things I've seen and learned, is they're in trouble. They're in serious trouble. And the reason they're in serious trouble because it doesn't offset. For the few things they did good, they'll get reward for it. Everything else, oh, look at this person, so nice, so this, so that. Not worth nothing. That's worth something. Being loved in this world says God loves you above, but it's not the same thing. A person can be popular, God can hate you. Right? It's not about numbers. Right? It's seriously about what a person does. You got these, billionaires giving away a lot of the money. That's huge. Right? That is a big thing, but what are they giving it to? Maybe they're giving it to garbage. To give it to garbage, God's going to say an opportunity to do other things. I gave you this money and you used it for the wrong things. Yeah? And what if they gave a lot of charity, but they were philanderers? Yeah, committed adultery, did other things. Is giving all that money to charity that offset? These are big questions. Yeah? What if they were nasty to other people, but they have other good things they did? Right? See how God's going to judge it. But I can't imagine that, goodness itself is only seen by someone who's ultimately good. Someone who embellishes good. Someone who defines goodness. That's absolute, never changes. First, the 13 principles of Maimonides, 13 principles of faith. Very good. Yeah? That's how you define it. That's the definition of good. The ultimate definition. So do they hold by those standards or not? Most likely they don't. That's my guess. Most likely, maybe some things they do, maybe. Right? I think the vast majority of things they don't, and that's why this is a problem. Right? Because people make the mistake. It's like, oh, the person was so good. Okay. Maybe they did good things. Do they do good things in God's eyes? They'll say, well, for the most part. For the most part, what do you mean? What do you mean for the most part? What does God want someone, what a Jew to do? Keep his mitzvahs. Draw close to him. Be inspired. Try and inspire others. Right? They say this person had a hard life. Can't blame them. All right, that's a different issue. Yeah, but in general, they're going to find out the truth. They give in to their desires. They fill up their stomach with treif and who knows what. So they say it's not their fault. Whose fault is it? Everybody's got to take responsibility. That's why I always say, if Christianity be true, I'd be out there plastering the walls everywhere, convincing people to be Christian, because you don't have to believe in anything. All I have to believe is in him. All I have to believe is in JC. I can do whatever I want. Beautiful. I'd sign up everybody in a minute, in a second, if it would be true. Because there's no responsibility for anything you do. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Problem is not true. It's only problem. Yeah, so there's responsibility. Person has to take responsibility. You can't just say, well, it was a good thought. In whose eyes, right? If it's in God's eyes, then how's the Torah view it? Torah view it that, oh, he's good in his heart and, whatever. Or the Torah view it, okay, the person gave in to desires. They're going to have to pay the price. Maybe there'll be something to them later. Okay. But people get caught up in this thing. I've heard it many, many times. The person's such a nice person. Okay, they very well could be. They have the parents, they do philanthropic things. Okay. I'm not, not everyone is certainly is created evil. Nobody's created evil. Okay. They're not inherently evil. Very good. But again, in the eyes of God, in the eyes of the Torah, right? All the Karaites will be happy, right? Forget any rabbinical laws. The eyes of God and the Torah. Can they honestly say they're good? They can say they don't care. They don't care if it's true, it's not true, whatever. Okay. But they're ignorant. Good. In God's eyes, are they good or not? I would think if I playing God, put on my funny George Burns glasses, my funny mustache, and I look down, I'm like, really? Come on. You think this is good? I create the world. You don't say anything. You don't pray to me. You don't make blessings. You don't keep the Sabbath. And to boot, you're married to a non-Jew. Like you're good. That's what I created you for. I mean, you take God's strict justice, you flatten this person like a pancake. Give him every opportunity to come back. They're not interested. Okay. But people get caught up and say, oh, but such a nice person. Okay. Does God think they're a nice person? You say, you know what God thinks. Okay. I know what the Torah says, more or less. And the Torah's going to say that this is a problem. This is a problem. Now, again, because they don't know anything, right? And because, they never learned, okay, there's a certain level of slack they are going to be given. Certain level of slack. Not a lot. Certain things they're never gonna get out of. Right? And they're gonna be in serious trouble. Okay. Other things gotta cut them some slack. Okay. But we're living our lives to be the best we can be, whether as a Jew, or Noahide or JIT, whatever, Jew in training. We're doing the best, or hopefully, we're doing the best, to be close to God. That's what He wants. He wants us to seek Him out. He wants us to keep His Torah. He wants us to keep His mitzvahs. You don't want to? Okay. You want fantasy? Okay. That's your choice. But again, if there's an ultimate definition of goodness, which is only by someone who's ultimate, right, and is unique in the world that can define goodness, right? That's absolute. That's the word I was looking for. That's absolute can define what goodness is. So if you go against that absolute goodness, then guess what? You're in trouble. In every transgression a person does is a rebellion. It's in the essence a rebellion. But we don't look at it that way. We look at it based on desire. Okay. So that goes down another level. Yeah. It only goes down another level. But to say, well, this person, is good and this, that, and the other thing, and it should be okay. I don't know. I wouldn't go that far. Right? Things do not offset, and goodness doesn't mean what they think it means. Goodness is in the eyes of God. God is absolute. So if God is absolute, He's given the definitions. If He's given the definitions, I have to keep it. And I fall way short in this case. Way, way short. Now ask the question again. In God's eyes, is He good? Yeah. If you go through the list of 613 commandments, or half the list of what we can actually do, right? And now let's say you knew for a fact what this person didn't do, like all the way down at whatever level. And it's going to be a problem, right? Nicest person in the world, it's going to be hard for them. It's going to be very hard for them. God's going to have a lot of mercy. A lot of mercy. He's going to have to face a lot of things they did because they didn't know what they were doing. Okay, not everything. There are things they are going to be in serious trouble for. Intermarriage being one of them. Desecration of Shabbos another. Yeah, even if they don't know what they're doing. Okay. Right, but like you can see, this kind of bothers me because people are going to take it totally out of context and say, but the person's a nice person. The person was the sweetest guy, never hurt a fly, this and that. Okay. Yeah, it doesn't have character traits to work on. To keep Shabbos probably, to do other things. This is God talking, not me. So what do he do? What do he do for God? He did for himself, did for his stomach, did for who knows what. Right? So they're in trouble. They are going to be in trouble unless they repent. If they don't repent, God should have mercy. Should have mercy on all of us, right? But at the end of the day, they could be the nicest person in the world. Give all this money to charity. Okay, it's worth something. That's worth something, right? But I would ask the question, is that enough? Is that enough? Now we always say, okay, we do know it's going to be war in the next world. Yeah, is that going to be enough to get them there? There's a minimal level, the Ramchal says, in Derech Hashem, in the way of God. There's a minimal level you have to reach. He doesn't tell us what it is. But there's a minimal level. Is that enough to bump them up or not? Considering what they don't do. Yeah, and all the things they don't do. We mentioned just by Lashon Hara, 31 prohibitions. If they spoke Lashon Hara 100 times a day, they cursed half that amount of time. Multiply by 50, 60, 70 years. You got to find a very strong mitzvah they've done with a lot of self-sacrifice. Gonna try and at least offset that a little bit. It's gonna be very hard, very hard. As we said before, I come up with a list of hundreds of things. So again, we can cut them some slack and say they did not desire, they're not going to be punished as much. Okay, but God's the ultimate judge who's good or not, right? And goodness is defined by what the Torah says. And if you don't hold by what the Torah says, you don't do what the Torah says, how can the person say they're good? How can we look at them as being good? That's the issue. That's the issue. All right, I'm going to stop here. I do this every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism on YouTube. There I got videos, Q&As, ethics for fathers, book of Leviticus. Want to send me an email, RabbiChaimKaufman at gmail.com, RBBI, CHAIMCOFFMAN at gmail.com. Wishing everyone